jet, duck, yeah? What is your favorite architect? Woman or male? Say one. Whom do you like? Eisenman. Decorated jet or duck? Yeah, in a certain way, with him it's dangerous, because he makes very strange decorated jets, in a certain way. But of course, they have a certain reference to it, but the difficulty why it is a difficult duck is because what it represents, is not a symbol, or a kind of icon, but it's an index, and so therefore it's a little bit a weird one, I would also say there are more ducks, even when but it's unfair to tell him ducks because if you see all the work you see, it's constructed as a decorated jet. Now, I'll give an example. If you see a roof of Eisenman, it's not a roof that is structural, it's not a roof that is meaning, it's a roof that is decorating something, but the decoration is an index. But what is the difference? So if you describe an Eisenman work, why would you say it is a decorated jet? What does decorated jet mean? The most banal sense.
The facade represents something to protect. The facade represents a sign, something to protect.
There's not a decorated jet. Now, what's the decorated jet? How do you do this? How do you do a decorated jet? You do a facade. But you could say the duck is also a facade.
You create something which is not.
No, the thing is like this. The difference between the duck and the decorated jet for Venturi is that for him, duck is modernism, okay? And decorated jet is everything that is not modernism. Now, what does it mean? Every building before modernism, and this is why I think when Venturi goes, and this is why, especially, this is a book with Denise called Brown on the City, but the book that he wrote before, alone, was the book on complexity and contradiction in architecture. And what he did is he made an analysis of architecture of mannerism, and mannerism was a style, or a particular one, where you had a building and you glued on a front facade, and what you could say is that the front facade was in principle a meaningful entity to a certain public, but behind that facade there was just a building. Now, just to know, I was in Tehran the other day, it was in Iran, and even the moschee, that I found was a fantastic, I haven't with me, a decorated jet as better it can be, because I went from the backside of the moschee, and you literally could see, much better even with a Gothic, you saw all the on the backside it was just dome and building out of brick, and then you saw really a plate, like a wall, just glued on to the front, So it had no inherent structural capability. It was just a piece of billboard, And so, just know, so what that book is so genius about, in principle, is that a city like Las Vegas, which was meant in the 70s as a completely corporate, mafiosi chunk grab, what Denise Brown, Venturi, and they did is bring that city back on the discourse of architecture and saying what we see is actually the evolution of 5,000 years, or basically 5,000 years of architecture. So this is not a stupid place by non-architects. No, what he brought that city back into the discipline of architecture, of saying that what we can see is another idea of the decorated sheds. So as we have seen throughout the whole history of architecture, which means that buildings have the capacity, to be meaningful to a particular collective, but its basis is just a stupid background. Now, the most beautiful thing I've seen as a decorated shed, if you go to Venice, and you see a Palladio villa on the front, marble, the most expensive stuff, and on the backside, crappy brick, So that's where, or in the mosque that I saw in Isfahan, on the front, all these lapis, blue, and on the back, crap color. So the dark the dark is only not representing something on the outside, it only is representing itself, which is, it's a self-referential to its own thing. And so modernism, in terms of form follows function, is just expressing itself. It doesn't have a meaningful idea of being a box that you can just stick things on. Now, that is one. So these are the two things and so with this analyze already with complexity and contradiction, what the focus suddenly is at the beginning, you could say, of the disciplinary intention, that architecture goes away from constituting the idea of a plan into the idea of the facade. So, if we then look into this book, and just, if this is the small definition, there is I would argue that what they did is they brought the idea of semiology, which means that I read architecture as a sign and not anymore as a problem of function. And not as a problem of form, but what does architecture communicate as a sign? And of course, what the book is particularly about is about one kind of sign, and that is the idea of the symbol. Now, I'm relying to a definition by Charles Peirce. Charles Peirce is for many people used, as a reference to the idea of semiology, because he describes three different signs, and you could say within the discourse or the books that you're reading, these are the names that always occur. Now, one sign is the symbol, one sign is the icon, and one sign is the index. And so the interesting thing that Peirce distinguished is that for each of these signs there might be another public, or another audience related. So the symbol, just to be clear, when someone talks about a symbol, it means that there is a particular locality, I would say a particular locality or particular audience that understands the symbol. So there is a particular collective related to that symbol. Now, I'll give an example. If we, all of us, would go in front of a middle-aged church, we would stand there, and say, funky stuff, we would not understand anything. Now, if a middle-aged person from the 13th century would go in front of a Gothic church, for them, it's all literally, oh God, look at him, he looks like, it would all be meaningful stuff because it's a symbol of that collective in which religion played a certain role. So that's why when you go in another country, you don't understand this stuff because you don't belong certainly to the collective, or not anymore to that time. Now, the reason why Denise Scott Brown became interested in symbols because for them the symbols was related to what they could call a certain kind of locality. I wouldn't say localism, but a certain kind of new form of contextualism. Yeah? And that's why the second part, the book has two parts. Yeah? The first part goes about the car park, yeah? But the second part goes about the idea of the ordinary and ugly architecture, which means the only architecture we are interested in is not the one that we construct, but is basically constructed by people. Yeah? And people just do ordinary, ugly symbols. Yeah? So there's a kind of locality to this thing. And that's why contextualism plays a role, because all these ideas of symbols come from the immediate context. Yeah? Now, you can now imagine why, for example, Johann is using that, because the idea was that the billboard is a detachment from basically the decoration. So, to have this set clear, now let's look. I mean, I don't know why this doesn't work anyhow. Yeah, it doesn't matter. So, the second symbol that mostly is used is the idea of the icon. Yeah, probably the most famous book about this is by a guy called Charles Peirce. Yeah. Yeah, so these are here are the two. Charles Peirce, and Charles Peirce, Charles Jenks, yeah. And if you know about icon means it's a symbol, yeah, or basically a sign that refers to itself, yeah. So, for example, it refers to its own making, or it refers to the object itself. So not anymore to an audience, to an object itself. And the third one, and this is the one, for example, you could say Ram Koolhaas is doing icons. Yeah? They're not symbols, yeah, but they're iconographic. Yeah? And the other one, and this is the third one, is the idea of the index. Yeah, and this is basically what a lot of work of Eisenman, yeah, which means an index is a sign that doesn't relate to the appearance of an object. Yeah, it relates only to the trace or the hint. So that's why, for example, Eisenman does a lot of work. Yeah, that's why have you heard about the archaeological project? Yeah, so for example, I do a project and then I try to figure out what in time, which different ideas in time, or for example, maps or plans have been there, and I put them to the present or overlap, and which means I make something which is absent present again. Yeah, so the index is just the sign that there was something once there, but the thing itself is not there. Yeah. So the index is like a trace. Yeah. Yeah. You could say the position of the chairs, you know, as the index that there was today a review in here. Yeah. You know. Or if you see someone vomiting, you know, it's an index that someone went out, you know? Yeah. So here you can see this was the first, one of the projects that I think was the Werner Venturi house, and there you can see very nicely what you see is in principle a facade. Yeah, you see a decorated shed. Yeah. And all the indications is that that facade had nothing to do with that what is behind. Yeah? Because what it does is it communicates something to an audience, but it doesn't communicate to itself, and that's why it's not a decorated shed. Which means this is not the entrance. The entrance is on the side, even when you can go in there. The facade, and so you can see this is a window from Le Corbusier. This is the famous window that occupies the center. You know, it's a Rossi window, yeah, and that's basically it's used in Italy. Then if you see the facade, it has an idea of I think it's a Renaissance thing. This window, I don't know, but it's all of them belong to the history of architecture. Yeah. And so you can see from the back side, yeah, even when this was an entrance, you could not reveal how the back actually would look like. Yeah. So, and you can see it by things like this. So that became this idea that, and so here, this was the first book that Venturi wrote, and you could see this was where there was the first time a critique, yeah, on modernism, yeah, and that already was happening through the time. That what he meant by complexity and contradiction is that the kind of modernist reading of architecture itself would, and here comes already something which we spoke already in the idea of wrong parts, the author is dead, because it was already a critique that the complexity to which society is constituted cannot be incorporated by one single understanding of reality. Yeah? And also, what is interesting is that he figured out that even what modernism tried to say, it's contradicting itself. Yeah? Now, the most funniest story, I always say about this is the Mies van der Rohe Seagram building. Yeah, I don't know if you know. Yeah, Mies van der Rohe was actually known as the person for which, this is where we'll see later in the book, because in the architecture was always a kind of historical threefold, yeah? There was the idea of, firmitas, utilitas, and delight. I don't know if you heard of this. This is Venturi, this is Alberti. It also meant architecture should have a function, yeah? It should be for something, and it should be about beauty, yeah? And modernism, in a certain way, said, no, function and construction alone is already beauty, yeah? Beauty is not something or aesthetic. And he already showed, for example, in the Seagram building, yeah, that Mies van der Rohe was, of course, the person who wanted to use modern construction techniques, yeah, to make space, yeah, and all his operation had a useful, materialized construction meaning, yeah, and then there comes a Seagram building, yeah, and because of fire regulations, he was not allowed, what he usually does, to put the columns outside, yeah. So he had to make concrete columns in, but since he liked the structure of the columns, he put some fake columns on the facade, yeah? So even Mies then, in the end, became a postmodernist, yeah? Meaning that my building doesn't reveal what actually the truth of the facade is. Yeah? And so that goes the story. And here is the idea of mannerism, that what counts on that architecture is a means of communication to a certain collective, yeah? Now, here is the part one of the book, and which is, in principle, the part where Venturi shows how how he brings Las Vegas as a phenomena into the discourse of architecture, by showing actually a very interesting thing, that Las Vegas is not different than the Nolli plan of Rome. Yeah? And what he does that is by showing it for an analyze on the relationship between the sign in relationship to the architectural object. Yeah? And the second part, which I think is then the ordinary or the decorated shed, is done about the conceptualization about the decorated shed and the dark. Okay. Now, so here you see some of these images, yeah? And what you can see is, in the historical overview, this was Las Vegas in 1905. The reason why they went to Las Vegas is because, of course, the kind of architecture that you found there was not only constructed by a commercial USA, but in principle by a modernist city that had no historical reference as such. So in a certain way, he did something very similar, yeah, that actually Rainer Banger did to Los Angeles, yeah, but he didn't study it as an ecology, but as a Now here's the first map, and what you could see already, how that first map is showing, he uses a similar technique, and I think, a similar technique, where he wanted to figure out how does these buildings relate to the street and so on. And one of the most interesting analyses is this idea that what you could see is when this is a hotel, then that is in principle a decorated, a very, modernist building, but the idea of its sign is detached from the building, because this is in principle the sign for that kind of building. And so what now they start to do is they go through the Vatican Chapel or the Stardust, and trying to figure out what these signs are. This is one of the most interesting maps that you find in the first book, because he wanted to show that with the means of transportation and throughout the history of architecture and design had always a different relationship. So here, for example, he would say, in the Eastern Bazaar, this is what he would argue, there is no such thing as a sign because the sign and the space, is integrated in one thing, So the smell, the experience is so immediate, that you don't need the sign because the sign is there. And I have been once in a bazaar, you don't need to have a sign, hey, here are nuts, because you smell them, you really, it's all there. And then he would show in the medieval time, you would see that, for example, people would hang outside of the facade a sign and say, look, this is the hair cutter, this is so all the disciplines, that of working. And then he would say the main street, for example, puts a symbol on it, and then on the commercial strip, you see suddenly that there's a sign, there's a symbol, and then there is the house, and on the strip, they have been signified in the shopping center integrated. So what he wanted to show here is that the sign, became more and more detached from the building, It became now suddenly a threefold from sign, symbol to building. But it's interesting that he places that Las Vegas into the history of architecture. That's, I think, what the whole book is about. Then he became interested that what happens now is that the apology of architecture has a very interesting, strange relationship that when the one thing is the building and the sign becomes detached, there is a space between that, and that's the car park. So the apology of architecture was not only more an architecture where the sign was detached, but between the sign and the architecture, there's a new space, and that's the space of communication, and that's the parking lot. And so here, for example, you see where he shows now in relationship to the different kind of speeds and the different kind of cars. And here you can see already it's the modernism, because it has no design, it's just poor form and construction. Here a nice example, how you can see how the sign, and the space in between became detached. So there's a whole series of things. But what made the plan so crazy is he suddenly compared it, with a famous Nolli plan from Rome. Now, I don't know if you ever heard about the Nolli plan, But what Nolli did, and this becomes in a lecture that I'm going to do with it for the next two or three, because Colin Rowe is using it for a different thing. If you look at this Nolli plan, and of course there are different interpretations, but the reason why it is known in architecture is twofold. One is that what you could see is it's a plan between what is black as building and what is white, which is not building, Or that is to be architecture, that's to be, it's called now void space, or you could say public space. But public is in principle nothing else as empty. So there are two stages of matter, solid and void. Yeah? But why this plan is now interesting, because Nolly, who was an architect geographer in the 18th century, yeah? Same kind of time of Piranesi. Piranesi was working for Nolly. He actually should make a plan about Rome, what should be kept and what should be erased. Yeah? That was actually the idea. Yeah? But what came out was, and here you can see it, he was the first guy who has drawn not only the void space as that what is in principle the street, but it also has drawn the void space that is actually the interior of the building. And so what this plan was about, that everything that is public, independently of its inside or outside, becomes white, and black is that what is non-public. And so that idea that everything that is accessible as a public is one matter and the other one. And so what now, when Turi and Scott Brown is doing, they're by now drawing or redrawing the strip, they draw the strip in a Nolly manner, so that what you see is not just a building in relationship to the outside space, but they basically draw everything in the same matter. For example, here, which is not only the street, but everything is white that belongs to public accessibility, car park, lobbies, and everything. And so in principle, they map, they bring back the Las Vegas to the history of architecture by drawing it in the same way as Nolly. So this is, for example, a map of cars. Or this is now the buildings, and this is, for example, the whole commercial ceremonial space. So ceremonial space is not on the road, it's in principle also the building and the road together as one means of space. Just to understand now why some of you where Nolly becomes a reference to your work, because for that what is communication space and physical space, or symbolic space or architecture and infrastructure is actually one space. And this is the famous Nolly plan. What he shows is suddenly not only the street is interesting, but also all that is public within a building becomes as one space. So there's an overlap between the interior and the exterior, or what is accessible and not accessible to architecture. Now, and what is a totally other story that no one actually never meant, but you will see it very soon. Beside the Nolly plan, the book became very famous for exactly the opposite, namely how to represent architecture that is not trying to represent physical buildings. So just to know, a whole side story of that book is the architecture of mapping the city in different comparative methods. And probably the most interesting part of that book is now this part, where, and you will see it later on in OMA, you find it in MBIDV, and you find it a lot, and you find it in Liebeskind, or wherever, where you try to make onto the physical space a descriptive programmatic space that not only shows about the program, but shows basically the information of which this plan that usually cannot be represented by just the means of drawing a plan. So this becomes a notation between the function of something represented by a bunch of words versus overlap of a physical space. This is the reading. Here you can see, these are all the words, the billboard, the model, the stardust, all the words that indicate about the sign of the building. And here are some of the images, then some analysis. This is the analysis of the car park, and this becomes the front, the kind of catalog of understanding that strip, as a knowledge plan in which the building and the sign becomes detached from each other. The car park, this is the interior public of this, here another interior public, and what is old and new. Here are all the symbols and stuff like this. You see all these Hollywood movies. So here you see the building, the hotel, the sign of the hotel, and the car park in between. And he even has like this. Now, so what is now interesting in this first part, is that Nolly gave us a reading about the city, that on the one hand side has been contextualized to Rome, but at the same time gave us a reading of the city as an idea that every building in an urban fabric constitutes a representation of the sign to the building. So then the second part, where he in principle goes more into that idea of the ugly and the ordinary, he does also another thing, and this is only a book that you will see later on from Kulas. He shows suddenly his own work, and so why many people say that write your own Delirious New York is basically write your own Learning from Las Vegas, because what Venturi did and what Kohlhaas later on did with Delirious New York, just to know Delirious New York is in reference to learning, is the architect is trying, or a couple, Venturi describe their own practice. They write first a book on which they own later on become their practice, of what Aldo Rossi, for example, did with. So this is what then became the idea of a thesis. Just to know where thesis comes from, you write your own means of operation as a practitioner. So here comes the tool idea. The idea of the duck, which is, and the idea of the so the decorated shed is not only the box, stupid box, and the sign outside, but you could see what the difference is. The sign is detached from the building. So every building can become every other sign, but the shed is in principle a very, not only cheap, but very, ordinary building, because it can be built by any means of production that doesn't belong to a particular form of industry. And then the decorated shed is what a building is, the sign in itself. And that's why he compared this to modernism, because modernism represents, in the way how the building is, what it actually wants to constitute, meaning the best means of technology and construction, and has a kind of functionalism in itself. And so then, and here is, I think, the nice example, and you see, this is where he makes his historical reference, because historically speaking, the decorated shed was literally the facade on the shed, and the only thing what Las Vegas does is detaching the sign from the shed as such. But the important thing is that the shed is a different idea of building. Now, just to know, all the ones that you have chosen and you like, they all are on the left side. Zaha, Grob Himmelblau, they're all on the left side. The right side is in principle Holland, for example, what we saw is a decorated shed, because it produces a facade that has a context to interiority, and the inside will be completely different world. So here, the duck. So the duck is where the architectural system of space, structure, and program, so the idea of space, the idea of structure, and the idea of submerged and stored in a symbolic form. You could say it's also a symbolic functionalism, the duck. It symbolizes what the work wants to be about. And so here you say this kind of building becoming sculpture is so the building turning into a sculpture. Just everything what you did last year is just making ducks. Yeah? Just to be aware, in this school you just do ducks. Yeah? Yeah? You see, sometimes I think it's really interesting. Am I doing a duck or doing a shit? You know, I mean, I just do ducks. Yeah? So yeah, a duck, making it funky, look like something, and all the construction and geometry has to go into the duck, Yeah, I always like the door, how to make a door in a duck, But the decorated shed is now as a difference, where the system of space and structure are directly at the service of the program, and ornament is applied independently of them. And so here you can see already the ornament is not a negative thing that modernism applied, because the ornament to, for example, Lowe's was in the ornament, the socialist is making the more value for the capitalist. No, what he brings back is the ornament is a necessity, because it communicates to a particular locale. I mean, just to know, that's why a lot of computer generation people took on again the idea of the decorated shed, because now it was not anymore a labor problem, because the robot is doing our ornaments, So here, and I think this is now interesting stuff. He shows them in the book. He's a contemporary of his time, Paul Rudolphs. And then, which is the guy who designed the Yale University. This belongs to the idea of brutalism, It's kind of in the hype of modernism, And then his buildings. And what he wanted to show is that in late modernism, or let's say in the postmodern area of modernism, so the modernism after the Second World War, what you can see is that the building doesn't anymore do anything else than just contributing to its own appearance. And then he showed his guild house. And what you can see in his guild house is already a very, very strange relationship that he distinguished, for example, between the lower part of the building, because that is where people are, then the facade and the top. And you can see what he does. He indicates here a different material. Then he gives a sign, like a Stardust board, And then he also, the most expensive material is on the ground. Then he has, for example, he does the material in brick. Why do you think he does it brick? Because same as Holland, he does the facade. If you analyze this facade and you go to the Frankfurt Museum, do you see suddenly the parallels? There where the public is, I have sandstone. Then I just reproduce it as a street building. Then the sign of the building is large. Now the only thing, and all the windows and all the materials are used because of localities. So the brick is because it's a building in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is an old brick city, that's why you're building brick. Then the other thing is the arch on the top has a space behind, but that space is not representative to the arch. So what you see in the facade is not indicating immediately what is behind. But what makes it now to a weird sign is that he doesn't use only the windows and the symbols and so on, but as you can see, he does one trick, and that's what the architecture do. He just oversizes them as an idea of scaling. So everything just becomes much larger, than it actually. So there is an icon. As a trick of scaling, So here I would say look at this balcony. This round balcony have nothing to do with function, have nothing to do. It's just representing itself. So here you can see it doesn't have anything to its interiority, And this is the kind of brutalist style, And then his guild house is what he calls any meaningful thing. So here, the lobby, the plan. And this is a very important thing, is the most expensive material is there where the humans are, yeah? So that's why, for example, this material is a kind of like a symbol in itself as an indication of entrance, yeah? And that's where the most luxury is in the whole building. So then I think there are two interesting. Architecture is a decoration of construction, yeah? So this is already interesting, yeah? And I think this is why Eisenman, I would say, is a decorated shed and a duck. It looks like a duck, yeah? But if you knock on Eisenman's column, there is no column. It's only the sign of a column, yeah? So here comes the detachment, yeah, that architecture is just a decoration of construction, and it's not the construction itself. Now, just for a guy like Wolf Briggs, have you ever met him? When Wolf Briggs would go into an Eisenman building, he would get a heart attack, yeah, because as a pure modernist, yeah, loving Le Corbusier and Mies van Oort, everything has to be structural, you know? He's a duck builder, you know? Yeah? And then he goes to Eisenman, knock, knock, knock. Yeah? Sounds like nothing, yeah? Yeah? It's a decoration. So it's all right to decorate construction, but never construct decorations. Okay? So the duck is we actually construct decorations. Huh? Just to know, the whole digital, yeah, is constructing decorations. Okay, so, and now, I mean, there's a whole really beautiful, I mean, I show you mostly images that are original from the book, yeah? But what is now interesting, he goes now through the whole history of architecture, yeah? And shows, in principle, in a cathedral, you know, that, you know, the symbolism and the kind of iconography on the facade has a meaning, and so, for example, here, it's all about the idea of decoration, yeah? Or he would go and show that how each of these palaces have a temple. Or then, for example, here, these are the first ducks, yeah? Even very good decorated one, because you could say here is still the construction decorated, yeah? And not the decoration of construction. In Sullivan. Here, for example, you know, to the kind of whole kind of eclecticism, yeah, that you use a Gothic cathedral for a bank, yeah? A duck, you know, symbols, and also another nice decorated shed. These are, I think, a very beautiful Venturi Scott Brown fire station, where you can see all the doors and the windows, same ones he used for the Venturi house, because they're all too large. Then it has a big sign, but it's all fake because it looks like it represents a former fire station. So all this kind of symbolism. I mean, I think in a certain way, the analysis we saw today about Herzog de Meuron, there is a lot of decorated sheds, you know, in Herzog de Meuron. And I think this is now the interesting thing. This is what I said before. So you could say, if 2,000 years of architecture, yeah, before modernism, was based on the idea of firmness, commodity, and delight, meaning it should stand, it should also have a function, and also should be beautiful, yeah, then you could say what modernism in principle did is say, form and function is already beautiful. Yeah? So the idea of beauty as a means of communicating or ornamenting something, yeah, or as an aesthetic agenda has been eliminated by Gropius by saying, you know, just the thing has a function and the thing has a construction. That's already is the beauty. Yeah? And I think this is a kind of very nice summary of the book. You know? So here you could say in minimalism, you know, this is why the corporate America minimalism, you could say, are in principle ducks, yeah, because they just wanted to represent their own means of production. So that's why the Fordism, you know, this is why then, just to know, this is the reason why Gropius becomes later on critical. I mean, just now, not only he was criticized by Venturi as a duck person, yeah, he became then criticized as doing literally phenomenology instead of, he does transparent phenomenology instead of literally. So, I mean, just to know, all the Americans were in principle critiquing postmodernism. Or, so the grain thing, Baumhaus, then Elias, Sengel work. Ah, here, look, Chernikov. See, now I know why I never know Chernikov, because Chernikov is with a T. And also, I think what he shows in the work is that later Le Corbusier, and this is why we see, for example, then in Ronchamp, a whole kind of symbolism, and also in the church, yeah, that in the later Le Corbusier, you could see that they turn from ducks into decorated sheds. Yeah? This was still a good duck. Yeah, people say the best duck. You know, this is also a good duck. Yeah. So all this kind of, you could say, brutalist work, yeah, were in principle all ducks. I mean, just know, this was the critique of, because you see, the brutalists wanted to, and you have to imagine, especially in Europe, in the international style, yeah, you could say all these people that worked in the first of the second, before the Second World War, for Le Corbusier and for modernists, and later on become their own practice, in principle, they tried to make something good, yeah, of modernism, yeah, and that was in the attack on Venturi. I think I have a slide, yeah, here, where it says the mini megastructures are mostly ducks, yeah. So this is all kind of work of brutalism, yeah. Where is our brutalist friend? Duck, the duck, you know, here's a reader for your, yeah, okay. Anyhow, so what he then in the end, and this is where you can see some of the work that later goes on with Venturi Scott Brown, is trying to make the ordinary, or that what people construct, and here comes the reason why I brought this thing part of the lecture, yeah? Because to me, like many others, these were the first work, yeah, where the author was not written by another idea of constructing a new kind of architecture, but the author was written through the production of the city as an author. Yeah? And so when you see, for example, all what their work is about in terms of being work of the facade, then it was not necessarily a facade in relationship to a meaningful to an audience, but it was also that the city produced more or less the symbolic meaning of that facade. So there was an audience outside, yeah, that was so you could. This is my translation now of the Roland Barthes text. Yeah, the public, you know, was suddenly not anymore the functionalist for whom you designed the building, but it was the city as the public that basically were the instruments for which you design. Yeah, and so for example, if you then think about the ordinary house, yeah, then everything what the ordinary house looks to the outside, yeah, is in principle a reference to itself. And so that's why you can see then in later work he became interested in the home, what the normal people are producing and so on. I showed this. So, and I think this is a nice thing, you know, I'm a monument, yeah, because what he really meant by this is the decorated shed, yeah, is not a self-referential sign, but is in principle a monument, as you know, and monument means a collective memory, something that refers, yeah, to outside, to which it is in principle an icon of. So what he replaces the sign with, is by the idea of I'm not a monument, because here usually there would be the decoration of the jet, and that what is decorated is in principle a collective memory. It is larger than the building. I hope you understand it, but this is an interesting recommendation. Now then I thought, and I don't know if I have it with me. Oh yeah. And then I thought, this is what I mostly do. I show you some people that are still working on the means of decorated jets. Yeah. So I mean, this is the Venturi house. Now one famous project, one very young group of architects. I think they've split now, but I think you might know them. Facade. Yeah. An English company. I think they were doing also work in Australia, I guess. They were, for example, doing decorated jets. This was a project in the Netherlands, in Hoofdvliet, where you can see they did just a box, and then they just gave some meaningful stuff. Or just trying to decorate more or less with local symbolism. Yeah, they kind of show the wood house, the texts, and so on. Yeah? Or here, for example, a work from Facade, where you have with just ornament of architecture, facades. Yeah, I think this is a Disney. Yeah, this is the BBC studios. Yeah. This was the first Facade house. So here you can see probably the person that I've never mentioned to you. He's very unknown. It's an Austrian architect called Hermann Czech. Yeah, he was the one who already in the 60s, wrote about this idea, where you could see there is an old house in a new house, a vernacular in the modernist house. Yeah, so there is so you could say the new one, which looks like a duck, is embedded within a decorated jet. Yeah? This is the ugly Dutch, you see? Yeah, where you make the building look. This is the real decorated jets. Yeah? Well, they turn it a little kitschy. Yeah, but you could say this is a real duck. The plug-in city is just a duck. Yeah, and this is some old homes. Well. That was my little lecture on learning from Las Vegas. And so what I wanted to show you is, in principle, this idea, that architecture becomes suddenly, a semiological sign, to which, whatever it does, there is something that is larger than a building, and that's the audience, and that's the city. And so what you can reflect on, or what you design, is not for the audience as the architect, but the audience is the city that then becomes reflected in the decorated shed. That's my little story, and I just tell you, have nice holidays, okay? Any questions? No. Huh?